episode is brought to you by the AMAC app. The AMAC app is your go-to landing spot for up-to-date real news articles, polls, and interactive games. In addition to all of the great money-saving benefits that AMAC has to offer, just search AMAC in your app store and go ahead and download that. Now, today I'm delighted to have with us the founder of Just the News and the host of No Noise on Real America's Voice, our dear friend, John Solomon. John, welcome back to Better for America, and thank you for joining me today.
Oh, great to be with you. We love our partnership with AMAC. This is always a fun thing.
The last time we were together, you shared some breaking news. We know that a whistleblower from the IRS showed
Right.
evidence that Hunter Biden did not pay his taxes. You shared that he partook in foreign lobbying without registering. CBS News, they recently interviewed another IRS whistleblower who is alleging that the Department of Justice intentionally stymied an investigation into potential tax law violations by Hunter Biden. And then, of course, the Durham report confirms that the FBI's investigation into Trump's ties with Russia was a hoax, that it was created by Hillary Clinton to help her presidential chances in 2016. And I think even more shocking is that President Obama, Vice President Biden, and the Attorney General and the head of the FBI were all briefed on the plot. They did nothing to stop it. So what do you think needs to happen next to stop this kind of corruption, to ensure that our elections are never tampered with?
Well, listen, there is clearly a reckoning ahead for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which is at the middle of this sort of dual system of justice. Let's think about what we've learned just since the last time we talked. The Durham report allowed us to see two things. One, the FBI never had and never developed any evidence to suggest that Donald Trump was colluding with Russia. So they opened an investigation on the sitting Republican nominee for president in 2016 without an iota of evidence, and they sustained an investigation for 3 years with an investigation that was not predicated, was not merited, did not have any basis for being open. At the same time, that same FBI, in the same time frame, received significant evidence that Hillary Clinton's foundation may have been involved in a bribery scheme or a pay-to-play scheme, and the FBI did not open up on that. All right, so you've got two candidates for president. One gets treated in the most negative way, the other gets a free pass. Now, if that sounds familiar, let's go ahead to 2020, because in 2020, both in the spring of 2020 and previously in 2018 and in 2017 and in 2019, the FBI received various pieces of information that laid out a Biden bribery scheme. And yes, they didn't act on it very quickly. And as the IRS whistleblower has brought to light in the most recent days, in fact, he just testified behind closed doors last Friday for 6 hours before the Ways and Means Committee. He provided 7 documents, 23 pages long, that showed what the good reason was to investigate President Biden and his son for possible wrongdoing, and evidence that the Justice Department prevented career FBI and IRS agents from being able to fully go after the evidence or bring charges that they thought were warranted, by the way, a long time ago, more than a year ago. So you see this incredible system where the FBI treats the Republican in the most negative way, opens up an investigation without evidence, and 2 consecutive Democratic nominees where there is evidence of alleged wrongdoing, those getting kicked down the road, and the FBI having both of its, and IRS having both of its hands tied behind its back so it can't pursue a proper investigation of the Democrats. If ever there was blatant evidence of a dual system of justice, those pieces of evidence really show it. And I think right now, Republicans have one option. With the budget that will come out in October 1st, 2023 for 2024, they have to take severe action against the FBI until the time the FBI can prove that it's gone back to being neutral, that justice is blind, and that they treat everyone with equal justice. Right now, that is not the case. There's a clear, overwhelming evidence that Democrats got treated favorably and Republicans got treated unfavorably in the criminal justice system.
Yeah, I mean, it is such a cliche, really, for me to ask how things would be unfolding if the roles were reversed. I mean,
Yeah.
think about it. If Donald Trump had conspired with a Republican administration to frame Hillary Clinton, and then
Right.
following his defeat, while she was in the Oval Office, continued to encourage a Republican Congress to parrot a lie that he himself created from the start, is there any doubt in your mind that he would have been tried, perhaps for treason?
Yeah, no, not based on the record of the last 6 years, right? Two impeachments, a long-running special counsel's investigation, now a new special counsel investigation. You just see even let's just take something that's more contemporaneous than what the Durham report and the IRS whistleblower have brought to us. Last year, in May of last year, Joe Biden discovered that he had classified documents. That wasn't leaked. It wasn't treated with any severity. At the same time, or a few months after Joe Biden's documents are discovered, they raid President Trump's home for the same issue. Again, a dual system of justice. The Republican gets, particularly Donald Trump, gets treated in the most extreme fashion, and the Democrat gets a pass. We know that the vice president had documents at his home, had documents at his University of Pennsylvania think tank office, had documents at his lawyer's office in Massachusetts and Boston, all which belong to the government, many which were classified, and yet he doesn't get raided. He gets treated with kid gloves while Donald Trump gets an unannounced raid at 6 a.m. on his home in Mar-a-Lago. The continuation of this dual system of justice, which seems evident from 2015-16 forward with the Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump investigations of the 16 election, is persisted and even become more aggravated, I think, in the last year with the Jack Smith investigation.
Another very tragic story, something that's underreported, is what's happening at the border. We see this dramatic spike in the abuse and trafficking of children.
Oh,
The
yeah.
CBP reported 366,000 unaccompanied minors were crossing the border illegally since Biden took office. That's a huge number, 366,000. DNA testing was another Trump era policy designed both to discourage illegal immigration and really root out child trafficking operations. Now, a government accountability office report cited by Just the News found that in 2022, roughly 1 in 10 children tested under the program turned out to not be related to the illegal alien adults who they were crossing with. And Just the News reported this month that the Biden administration is planning to end familial DNA testing at the US Mexico border on May 31st.
Yeah.
John, why is the Biden administration turning their backs on migrant children?
It is a great question. So you mentioned the 360,000, which is one of the largest influx of unaccompanied minors in the history of the country. We know at least 85,000 of those children that the government let into the country and they placed with people the United States government, the Biden administration has lost track of since they got in the country. So they're vulnerable. They're not here with their parents. We place them and then we don't follow up with them. We don't know what happened to them. That is gross negligence at its best. And then you take a look at the fact that the processing centers where these children were being brought in, they're already without their parents, they're vulnerable. The government, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, failed to do criminal background checks and sex offender checks on the workers that were working in the center. So they didn't do due diligence to protect the children after they're in the country. They lose the track of the children when they're in the country. Now, the third rail is a story that we broke last week that revealed that the one tool that the Border Patrol has been able to use to detect human trafficking of children, meaning children that are being brought in by the cartels, either for drug or sex trafficking, they're taking that tool away. They're no longer going to do DNA testing. If a child is with someone posing as a parent, CPB says, that doesn't look like the parent. This doesn't feel right. They do a DNA test. 1 out of every 10 times they found a trafficking situation. Now that tool is going to be taken away. The most vulnerable victims of the open border are now more vulnerable than ever because of very conscious decisions that the Biden administration has made. They lost track of children. They are not protecting them in the processing centers. And now they're not even going to detect whether they're being trafficked by the drug cartels. Every person I've interviewed in the last couple of weeks, CPB officials, senators, child advocates, all say that sex child trafficking will explode in the next few months once this DNA testing ends in a couple of days.
Really, it's just a terrible thing. We are in the midst of a culture war here at home, and I think it's so clear to our AMAC members. Now is truly the time to save our country and protect American families. But boy, this woke agenda is really being shoved down our throats. We've witnessed an encouraging sign, I think, in recent weeks when Bud Light reversed course after
Yeah.
Americans boycotted the company for its transgender sponsorship. Now, recently, Target has suffered backlash for displaying Pride Month clothing for both infants, children, and adults. These designs, by the way, they were created or collaborating with an open satanist I don't think that this is just conservative backlash anymore. I think that common sense Americans, regardless of politics, really are appalled by many of these things. How do we continue to effectively push back to defend American values?
I do, and I agree with you. This is no longer a conservative or red versus blue debate. This is a common sense versus extremism debate. And many people who aren't even involved in daily politics might not even be voting. They are voting with their wallets and their feet. Let's just think of a couple of things that we now have really good data on. There has been a mass migration from California and New York, the two epicenters of the liberal woke agenda. They have gone further and faster than anyone in letting violent offenders out, in creating new rules, putting biological male and female prisons. And what are people doing? They're leaving the states by historic numbers. So they're voting with their feet. Now you see Target lost $10 billion of valuation in less than a week after it had the transgender controversy. Bud Light still bleeding money in customers on a daily basis. The most powerful statement in a free market that Americans can make is to abandon products and companies that abandon their values, abandon their services for some woke agenda. And that is what's going on. And the numbers now are far greater than just the conservative activists that normally might get involved in something like this. This is a sea of Americans standing up and saying, corporate America, you've gone too far and we're going to punish it for you. And I do think for those who want a common sense America, this is a very bright moment that wallets and feet are voting in ways that we haven't seen in a very, very long time.
Speaking of wallets, many of our AMAC members, they are struggling financially. So I do want to ask you, is Biden's inflation, perhaps a looming recession, high interest and low growth, they continue to hurt seniors and the whole entire country. What chance do you see, especially after the debt ceiling fiasco, what chance do you see that Biden may wake up, maybe reopen parts of the energy sector, exercise some fiscal responsibility and stop overspending? Do we have to wait for 2025 for that, or could it happen sooner?
It's a great question, right? The real test for where Joe Biden is, does Joe Biden pivot back to the middle ahead of the 2024 election, will come with the fall budget. The Congress is going to pass a budget for the first time in many, many years. It governs the fiscal year that begins October 1st, 2023 through the 2024 election cycle. If Joe Biden vetoes a budget that Republicans put in place that really cuts back spending, and some Republicans are talking about cutting back anywhere from 5 to 15% of the federal spending to kind of claw back all of these excessive expenditures that began with the pandemic. If he vetoes that, then he's staying on the left side of his party and Americans will be able to make an informed decision. If he signs the budget, Americans will still say, well, we know what he did. He's a big spender and he's just trying to fool us in terms of election. It's a very tough circumstance that the president finds himself in. When you look at the polls, fewer than 1 in 3 Americans think he's doing a good job in the economy. That is usually a death knell for presidents. Most of our elections are pocketbook elections. Right now, Joe Biden's ratings on protecting the American pocketbook are at all-time lows for a president. And I think that doesn't bode well. I don't think no matter which way Joe Biden pivots, he's going to be able to shed the reputation that he's been bad for the economy or win much more of the American trust back. He's lost a lot of it in his first 2 years of his presidency.
This administration is seriously hurting seniors on fixed incomes, and we're keeping our listeners updated. They can go ahead and check out some great articles that we've got on amac.us. And I want to send our folks over to you, John. Tell us how they can listen to you.
John Solomon Reports is the podcast on all the podcasting platforms. JustTheNews.com is our website. And on all social media, Truth and Getter and Twitter and Facebook, my handle there is J Solomon Reports, J Solomon Reports.
Excellent, John. Thank you so much for joining me. As always, we so appreciate you giving AMAC members an in-depth look at all things. Thank you for joining me, and I can't wait to have you back with us again soon.
Thanks, Rebecca. Really enjoyed the conversation.
If you enjoyed this episode, you can listen to more just like it. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, or by downloading the AMAC app. Don't forget to follow us on social media. Until next time, I'm Rebecca Weber. This is your podcast, Better for America. Thank you for being here. Have a wonderful evening.